Good morning. My name's Keith Davenport. Me and my family, my wife Allison and 4 kids, we've been coming here for about 2.5 years now. And it's my honor to get to fill in for Pastor John this morning as he's on sabbatical. I am a former pastor in the Church of the Nazarene. I pastored for a long time last in Lawrence, but now work in the nonprofit world. And so glad to get to bring this message to you this morning. And this morning we're going to talk about the entire book of Mark in one sermon. And I promise that we'll be done before Pastor John gets back from sabbatical. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to start off by talking about literary devices and mechanisms, and then we're going to talk about Indiana Jones, the moon, go through the beginning, talk about an impure spirit. We're going to ask this really big, important question, and then we're going to talk about some stories, Atonement, the Book of Eli, Sixth Sense, Darth Vader. We'll kind of start turning towards the end when we start talking about some bookends, Centurion, Curtain, reinterpreting this old movie, Brink. We'll see if anybody knows that. The letter C, poetry, the ACT, haircuts, note, and then, of course, the best way for any sermon to end, talking about Yoda. So let's begin. So literary, any of you who studied English or are big communications academics, you're going to get bothered by what I have to say because I'm going to group a bunch of stuff together. But I love understanding literary devices, rhetorical devices, the way in which we shape our stories and the way that we tell a story so that it's not just the words that matter themselves, but the function that we kind of put them together. You might recognize this scene from Princess Bride where we all remember the story of it, and my name is Indigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. I told that to my kids for like 5 years before they saw the movie, and then they finally got it. But we have these memories from like the fairy tale, but often we forget until we start watching the movie again that it actually gets set up by this scene of a grandpa telling the story to his grandson, and he's reading the book. So you know right on the front end that it's going to be a fairy tale. There's something fairy tale about that. I used to listen to this podcast called Writing Excuses, and it's these group of authors that come and teach people how to write stories and these different mechanisms they use. And one of the ones that they talk about, and as an example, is from Indiana Jones. In the opening scene of the very first Indiana Jones movie, where it's probably the most iconic part, where we see Indiana Jones. He goes into this cave, and there's all these traps, and he has to walk in the right place. The ground falls out underneath him, and he finally gets to the statue. He quickly moves it off and puts something that's supposed to be the same weight on it, but it turns out that's a pressure plate. It goes down, and all these traps start chasing him, including the most iconic giant boulder that we then get to see over and over again in Lego movies, and like it just keeps reoccurring over and over again because it's so famous. And he somehow miraculously gets past all of these traps. He looks really cool and awesome. This is a movie we're excited to watch. And then he's met by his arch nemesis and an army behind him who just then takes away the statue because they cheated. Well, this is a literary device, actually, and when I tell you what actually is happening here, you're going to start remembering it and seeing it in lots of other books and movies. Because this whole idea is it sets up Indiana Jones as this hero who has a lot of great skills and great attributes, and he is able to get through all these traps. He's this really cool guy that has a whip of all things, and it helps him, but it's just not quite good enough because the bad guys still win in this opening scene. Well, when you see this in other places, what you'll come to find out is it's actually this device that helps you really like the first character, because it shows you that this character is good and cool and neat and has some awesome things and like is exciting, but is not perfect. Because if they were perfect, it would be a really boring movie. If he had just gotten out with the statue, that wouldn't really be an exciting beginning. It wouldn't have hooked you for the rest of the story. But there's this device that's used here that gets you to really like this character because they're really good, but they're not perfect. And we can like heroes like that. It's not a Harrison Ford sermon, but I think about another device is often ways to show something without saying it. And there's this scene in the very beginning of what we now know as Episode 4, New Hope, the very original Star Wars movie, where Han Solo takes Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker off Luke's home planet, and they're trying to get to Alderaan. If you're not a Star Wars fan, I'm trying not to geek out on you here a little bit. Let me simplify this just a bit. So they're in space, and they just come out of like this tunnel of light speed, and they see something in the distance. And they say, there shouldn't be a moon here. And then the response is, that's no moon. That's a space station, the Death Star. And by saying, there shouldn't be a moon here, or that's no moon, what we know immediately is that this thing that they're looking at is really big without them having to say, hey, what's that really big space station over there? Right? So we continue to see how writers and storytellers can pull these different techniques and skills out, and you can put it in to tell the story in a very particular way. It's not so much that it's important that it says that's no moon. It's what is behind that that's important. So let's look at the book of Mark. Mark chapter 1, so the very beginning of this book. So most scholars think the book of Mark was the first of the Gospels that was written, and then Luke and Matthew, they take stuff from Mark and kind of fill it out a little bit. But let's look here for just a minute. The beginning of the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet. I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way, a voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight paths for him. So we got some literary devices here that I want to draw your attention to. So first of all, when we think about the Gospels, when we read them, particularly if you've grown up in the church, but really even just growing up in our culture, you already have some preconceived notions or some understanding of who Jesus is. It might just be a little or it might be a lot, I don't know, but it's a lot harder to come to the Bible kind of as a blank slate. But what the author of Mark wants the reader to know, this is one of the few times in here that he's just talking to the reader, is we get this hint that Jesus is the Son of God. So this isn't part of a narrative that's happening. He's not telling a story about Jesus' interaction with somebody else. He's just telling us as the reader that Jesus is the Son of God. And kind of as an interesting piece, another thing that can happen in the Bible that's easy to read over, then the finish of that line was written in Isaiah the prophet. So where do you think those quotes come from? Well, Malachi and Exodus, of course, not Isaiah. And so there's some really interesting pieces about ways in which the writer of Mark draws from images from Isaiah in the whole book. That's maybe a different sermon, so maybe we aren't covering the whole book of Mark today. But in the beginning, we get this hint that Jesus is the Son of God. And then we'll just skip down a couple of verses. At that time, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. Just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, he saw heaven being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice from heaven, "You are my Son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." Okay, so again, this is the first now narrative, the first storytelling that Mark is doing. He's already given us a hint that Jesus is the Son of God, and then Jesus is with John the Baptist, and then we have God saying, "You are the Son of God." So we have this voice in here. And we're going to come back to the being torn open part. We have this idea of the heavens being torn open, and that's kind of signifying that God is about to act in our world. Skip down a couple more verses. I'm sorry, this is a little small, so I'll read it out loud. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went to the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Just then, a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," said Jesus sternly. "Come out of him." The impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. The people were also amazed that they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He even gives orders to impure spirits, and they obey him." news about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. Okay, so this is one of Jesus' first ministry pieces that Mark is writing, and it's the introduction of this theme that carries on through the whole book. The impure spirit knows who Jesus is, the Holy One of God, and then Jesus says, "You be quiet." And it starts this theme that happens throughout the book. It's the question of who is Jesus? And if you were to read the book of Mark from start to finish, what you'll find is that the demons tend to know who he is, and Jesus tells them to be quiet and not tell anybody. When he heals people or forgives them their sins, he tells them to go on their way and not to say anything to anybody. In this key passages in chapters 8 through 10, he's on the way with the disciples, and it seems like the disciples maybe start getting it. You have Peter's confession of him as the Christ, but every time that they say something along the lines that he's the Messiah, immediately the next story is showing that they don't get it at all. So right after, for the book of Mark, the writer that's trying to say, right after Jesus says, "You are the Christ," right after Peter says, "You are the Christ," the very next line, next paragraph, Jesus has to say to him, "Get behind me, Satan," because Peter doesn't want him to go to Jerusalem to die. So they just haven't got it. There are no humans in the story that are understanding who Jesus really is. And Mark really is leaning into this question about who is Jesus. But it keeps being a secret. My wife is a big reader. I feel like I've read a ton of books, but the reality is my wife reads a ton of books and then tells me about them. And I remember, I think it was maybe when we were still in college, she read this book called Atonement by Ian McEwan. And I remember her reading it and it kind of being interesting, but she didn't really like how it ended. It was kind of a little bit of a straightforward type book. And she was kind of frustrated, so she put it down, and she didn't even bother to read the epilogue because it just ended so disappointingly. Well, a little while later, a movie came out about it that had Keira Knightley and James McAvoy in it, two actors that we enjoyed watching. So we watched the movie and decided to go about it. And the whole idea here is that there was this Keira Knightley, her character's, I think, little sister does something, tells a lie or something that splits up this romance, and they go on their way. And the story goes about that eventually they find their way back to each other and fall in love and live happily ever after. So that's why it was kind of like a blah story. And then all of a sudden at the end, it cuts to this scene. And my wife audibly goes, "No," because she didn't read the epilogue. So the story is set in World War II, but then all of a sudden you see cameras in modern day interviewing this woman who is the little sister who grows up, who then tells the story that none of what I just said really happened. After I lied to them and they split up, they both ended up dying in World War II. And the whole story was my way of seeking atonement for what I had done. There's this twist at the end that just reinterpreted the whole movie you just sat through. The Book of Eli, not a kid-friendly movie, just to tell you, rated R. Denzel Washington, it's like this pretty stereotypical movie where you go through. It's an action, dystopia, apocalyptic type movie. And Denzel's character, who is Eli, the Book of Eli is not a book of the Bible, by the way. Eli goes through and, he's fighting all the bad guys and doing all these cool fighting and shooting and all throughout. And then you get to the end. I'm going to spoil this for you, so just sorry, you still might want to watch it. You get to the end, and you find out he's blind. So then you want to go back and watch the whole movie over again because it was just like, ah. Most classic one of these that has a twist at the end that you didn't see coming, Sixth Sense. Bruce Willis' character is with the little boy throughout the whole thing and trying to help him solve these mysteries. You hear the "I see dead people." That's where that saying comes from. And you get all the way to the end and then find out that the whole point of the movie was the boy was trying to help Bruce Willis figure out that he's actually dead. And so then you have to go back and watch the whole thing and realize that nobody ever talked to Bruce Willis in the whole movie. I'm ruining all these movies for you, but they've been out for a couple decades. So if you haven't seen them, you probably weren't going to anyways. Okay, let's come back to Star Wars. This is what I like about Star Wars when we talk about it in relation to the Bible, is that Star Wars has become such a significant part of our culture as a whole. Not everybody's seen Star Wars, but there's things that come from Star Wars that most people recognize. You very rarely get the chance to watch a Star Wars movie, particularly the original 3, with somebody who's never seen any Star Wars before. But I had that chance once. When I was working at Johnson County Community College a few years ago, I had a lot of international students that worked with me, and I had the group of them over to my house to watch Star Wars. Many of them had never seen it before. And so you have this set up in the first movie where Obi-Wan Kenobi tells Luke that your father is dead, Darth Vader killed him. And so you watch this whole movie. It's a great movie. It's this timeless classic. And you watch the whole thing, and then you get to the second movie. We were doing this as a marathon with these students in my living room. You get to the second movie, and you get to this scene, and you hear this classic line, say it with me, Luke, I am your father. And then we don't remember often, but Luke is like, no! It's like my least favorite part of all Star Wars movies. But my friend, my student who was on the couch with me, he was like, no. He knew the line, but he didn't know that it was Darth Vader who was going to be his father. And now we have, I've lost track, 12 movies, 4 animated series. No, I don't know, there's more than that. Billy will correct me later. But at this moment, and then after he said this, and before we got to the third movie, I was like, wait, there's another twist in the third movie that's going to get you even worse, with Princess Leia being his sister, and, But you want to go back and rewatch the first movie, knowing then that Darth Vader is actually Luke's dad. And now we have a lot more of that backstory, but we didn't originally. And if you come to that story not realizing, or not already knowing that that's a fact, it is this great twist. I'm too young to actually have experienced it like that for the first time, like when it came out in the theaters. Let's go back to Mark, though, because Mark has a twist at the end that helps us in a similar way. We're going to jump all the way to the end of Mark chapter 15. There are 16 chapters, just these 3 verses. And with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, surely this man was the Son of God. So remember the beginning, we had this little hint to the readers from Mark that says that the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And then he gives this first narrative of the baptism. And what we have here are these bookends, another literary device that's often used in Scripture that means something important to us. So on the left is the passage from chapter 1, and the right is the passage from chapter 15. And I'm going to looking at the right column. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. So the word breathed comes from the same Greek word pneuma as spirit. And so when Jesus breathed his last, his spirit went out from him. So it kind of put that in comparison, or kind of folding in half over the spirit descending on him in chapter 1. In chapter 1, the heaven was being torn open. And in chapter 15, the curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. If you remember from some other lessons, the temple had these 2 different rooms that were important. There was one room that was called the holy place where some people could go in, some priests. But then it was believed with the Ark of the Covenant that behind a second curtain that was really, really thick and big was what was called the Holy of Holies. And the Ark of the Covenant was there, which was representative of the actual presence of God. And so in this moment, the curtain was torn in 2 from top to bottom, showing that God is on the loose. His presence is no longer confined. He's in and amongst and around all of us. in chapter 1, heaven being torn open. Again, this picture, this idea of God is breaking into our world. And then in chapter 1, we have God who says, a voice came from heaven, you are my son. And then I've already shared that throughout the whole book of Mark, you have this question of, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? And the demons know, but Jesus tells them to be quiet. The people that Jesus heals know, but Jesus tells them to be quiet. And the disciples think they know, but they keep getting it wrong. But then in chapter 15, the very first time and only time in the book, a person says it. The Son of God. So we have the centurion who is, again, the first person in the whole book who says, surely this was the Son of God. Remember the big question? Who is this Jesus? This literary device Mark is using on purpose because this is important. This is the answer to the question. The whole theme of the whole book about who is this person? Surely this man was the Son of God. Talked about the curtain. God is on the loose. With the crucifixion of Jesus, with the realization of who Jesus really is, God is on the loose. It reminds me of C.S. Lewis and Aslan, the end of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where talks about how Aslan, who's kind of the metaphorical representation of Jesus, is dangerous. It's out there. So when we do this, it pushes us to reinterpret what we've already read. This is that same passage of the impure spirit at the beginning. So we have this understanding now that the whole point of Mark is answering this question of who is Jesus, and we've set up this whole theme that goes 15 chapters long where it's this question, and finally we see on the cross when Jesus dies that the main point of this whole story is that Jesus is the Son of God and that God is on the loose, that there's no more barriers between humanity and God, that God is in our world and present. So just like Darth Vader and Book of Eli and Sixth Sense, let's go back and reinterpret some of what we've already read. When they went to Capernaum and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. And the people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. So in their time, it was typical for there to be religious teachers that would come about, whether a rabbi, a traveling teacher, or more formally teachers of the law. And what they would often do is kind of build these cases one on top of each other of, well, this famous teacher of the law said this, and that famous teacher of the law said that. And they just kind of pile on what other people had said. And so for a teacher to come and teach something new or different was really strange. And so when they first were encountering Jesus, the way they understood him was, wow, this is a really strange teacher because he's teaching as one who has authority. But now when we read this, we realize this is Jesus, the Son of God, not just a teacher of the law. He still does this miracle of exorcising this impure spirit. But it's not significant because he was a teacher of the law with authority. It's significant because he was the Son of God. And you trace this theme throughout the book of Mark. You see miracle after miracle. You see lessons that he's teaching to his followers and to people who had come out to him. And when you're reading it through the book, from start to finish, before you get to this twist at the end, it just seems like this is this really good teacher who can do miracles. The people in the story, Mark makes it clear, don't know who he is. They're experiencing Jesus for the first time, just like my students experienced Darth Vader for the first time. But then when you realize who Jesus really is, those miracles mean something different. The teaching means something different. Because it's not just the smart guy doing it. It's the Son of God. A couple pieces here that I want us to kind of resonate or ruminate in for a minute. First of all, the reality of Jesus isn't dependent upon our understanding of him, or having the correct understanding. Jesus is Jesus regardless of what you think about him. It doesn't change his identity. as the Son of God because you think something different. And in the book of Mark, even though the disciples didn't get it right throughout the whole book, and there was no other person who got it right in the book, Jesus was still Jesus. And for us, Jesus is still the Son of God, even if we doubt or if we aren't sure about what we believe about him. We don't have to have everything lined out or ironed out in our belief system in order for Jesus to be Jesus. Jesus' teaching and miracles were good, but they are timeless because of Jesus' identity. So when you read the book of Mark, you see these miracles and you read these teachings, these parables that we still tell over and over again, and they're good, right? I mean, it's good to heal somebody. It's good that someone gets forgiven of their sins. It's good to have these lessons about how the kingdom of God works and how we can interact with one another. But the reason that we are still telling those stories isn't because they were good. It's because of who Jesus was and is. It's because of his identity as the Son of God. The question wasn't ever about how should we behave. The question is, who is Jesus? The main point for Mark wasn't telling a story about all the things that Jesus did. It wasn't about telling all the things that Jesus said. It wasn't about the disciples learning how they should behave in our world. It was about revealing the identity of Jesus. Our Christian lives should not be built around trying to figure out the right way to behave, the right way to talk to people. It should be built around this reality that Jesus is the Son of God. Let's talk about Brink. Did anybody ever see this movie? It's like in the 90s Disney movie. Yes, I've never met anybody who has ever seen this movie before. Oh, I knew I liked you. There's this movie, clearly not very popular, in the 90s called Brink. It's rollerblading. And I don't remember anything about this movie except for this one line. Towards the end of the movie, there's this big like X Games type rollerblading competition, and the main character like falls or messes up sometime. I can't remember. And a couple of the characters are talking, and one says to the other, they're trying to look for advice on how to win this. Skate better. And it's kind of this goofy line, and I've said it probably lots of times. But it's this idea that we just have to do something better in order to win. Like, just act better. Just do better. If we just skate better, you're going to win. And I think that oftentimes we frame our Christian lives in this way. Well, if we just read the Bible more, be better. You know what? Be a better dad. Be a better mom. Oh, if you were a better son or daughter, you would do this, this, and this. And we just kind of start to evaluate our whole lives around, we need to be doing something better. But that's not the point. We're going to talk about the letter C next. So I was in a class in seminary. I don't think I've ever told this story publicly before. It was shortly after our first kid was born. And at the beginning of the semester, I just missed some due dates. I don't even remember the situation exactly, but I missed some due dates and was behind on some assignments. And I dug myself this hole in my grade for the semester. And I reached out to my professor. I was very apologetic, and I just started working really hard. And so the rest of the semester, I got A's on everything. I was getting everything on time. And I, at the end of the semester, realized I had done all this work. I'd gotten my grade just up to a C. And I was a good student, so this was like I'd never had a C before. This was like a big deal to me. And it's not now, but it was then. And, I was like, I worked so hard, and the best I could do was get it up to a C, because I dug myself such a steep hole. The semester had ended, and a few weeks later, the final grades were posted, and I checked my grades, and I looked in this class, I had a B. I knew that wasn't right because I'd been like counting it down to like the 100th of a decimal point. So I reached out to the professor. It's like, hey, I know that I didn't get a B in this class. And he just replied, I know, but this is grace. He knew that I'd been working hard, and he was understanding my situation. But this still makes me feel uncomfortable. I've read so many articles about grade inflation, about how that hurts students. I have this like really strong like moral compass about justice and getting what's due. And this still makes me feel so uncomfortable. But I will never forget what grace means, because I got something I didn't deserve. I worked really, really hard to get that C. And then I got a B. It's not about our actions. It's not about behaving the right way or doing the right stuff. It's about the identity of Jesus and the grace that comes from this reality that Jesus is the Son of God. There's a couple Greek words in the New Testament around this idea of doing and being. And some of them kind of go along this idea about if you're going to be a Christian, it's like this checklist, like like you do on a Post-it note, and you feel really good when you mark it off, and that's how you measure yourself. But this one here, there's a Greek word poeo that is poetry. And I like this word as a description of what it means to be a Christian. Because it's not just this checklist of things to behave the right way, to do the right thing, or to say the right things. It's more of this creative outpouring of reality. There's something true on the inside of us, or something true about our world, and then we write it in this creative, poetic way that kind of encapsulates that without just being a checklist about things. I used to think that God's will for my life, God's plan, was a lot like the ACT, and every decision was a multiple choice answer, and there was only one right one. And if I got it wrong, it was just wrong. I just had to move on to the next one and hope I got the next one right. And I put so much pressure on myself to always get the right choice that I would lose sleep. I would not be able to eat. I'd be stressed out. Like, I don't know what God wants me to do in this moment. I don't know what the right thing is. Should we move here or there? Should I take this job or that job? Should I buy this car or that car? That's not the point. The question isn't, how should we behave? It's, who is Jesus? This is my son Milo. It's about a year ago, one of his first haircuts. He loves haircuts now. This last week, I took all 4 of my kids to get haircuts. They're out of town this weekend, and wanted them to be all taken care of before they left town. And so, those of you with kids, you remember how amped they get before they do something exciting? So I took the 4 kids by myself. The kids are 12, 9, 6, and 3. It's an in-home barbershop the day before they left to go see their cousins. The kids were running, like, you can kind of see this like long hallway. Like, they were like running up and down and yelling. Of course, I have like scissors on the back of my head, so you can't like turn and do whatever. They were jumping on the furniture. They were yelling. They were throwing Pokemon cards. It was crazy. But this week, as I've been thinking about the fact that the question is about who is Jesus and not how should we behave, I realized that I probably would be a better parent. Things would be less stressful or hard if I remembered that really I don't just want to teach my kids how to behave. I want them to grow up to be good people. I don't just want them to act good. I want them to be good. It's not just about doing the right things. It's about being. I started a couple years ago. I started a new job, and a few weeks after I had started, I got this note from my colleague that just was like, "Dear Keith, I'm so glad you came to work with us. You've taught me so much about my faith and really helped me dig back in. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you." I can't remember a single spiritual conversation I had with this coworker. I can't remember anything that I'd done around this at all. We can get so tied up, and we have this history of trying to talk about evangelism in this sort of program type way, right? Or what it means to live out your faith in a particular way at school. Man, when I was in high school, I used to get mad at my classmates for swearing in the hallway. Do you know how many friends that got me? I just did my job. There's something about if we just focus in on being, on recognizing that Jesus is the Son of God, and that is what changes us. It's not something we do. It's not how we behave. It's not how we say. It's because of the identity of Jesus Christ himself. It changes the way we live. It's more like poetry, a natural outflowing of this reality than it is a checklist. Got to end with Star Wars. The most famous line from Yoda, I believe, is do or do not. There is no try. That works great in Star Wars. And I think we've adopted it too much in Christianity. That we're constantly just putting pressure on ourselves to do more, to be better, be nicer, be kinder, be more generous. Give this, give that. Be a better parent. Don't yell at your kids. When really, we just need to be. It can make us feel uncomfortable. I think most sermons that we hear end up with a call to action of do this, or this is what you can do next. There isn't one here. And that's the point.